Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. A very heartily welcome to the Startup Genome Global Webinar Series. Today, we are speaking about the topic of global connectedness and this fabric of global connections that is so important for startup ecosystems and for our entrepreneurs and our ecosystems to thrive. And we will particularly focus on concepts of conferences, events, these platforms that allow us to build human connections, business relationships. And I'm delighted to be joined here today by Jonathan Ortmans, President of Global Entrepreneurship Network, and Patrick Deleve, the founder and Chief Product Officer of the Next Web. Jonathan is joining us from Washington, D.C., and Patrick from Amsterdam here in the Netherlands. And Hannah, if you move us a tiny bit. Brief introduction, you've seen the names. Patrick, Jonathan is with us today. Yeun and Yi-Young Kim from Seoul, the Seoul Metropolitan Government, also wanted to talk to all of us today. Unfortunately, time zones didn't really work out, so we've done a wonderful recording that gives you a little bit of a feeling of the perspective of Seoul, an enormously vibrant Asian ecosystem, really on the rise into the top 20 ecosystems of the world. We will share all of that material with the slides to this webinar here with our audience on the call after the event. Okay. Yeah, briefly, Startup Genome, who are we as an organization? Our purpose, our mission, and I think I may speak for Jonathan and Patrick as well a little bit, is to really accelerate the growth of startup ecosystems as an economic engine by means of using good policies, good initiatives that we all hear in our network, we learn in our network, and that can be shared amongst our network connections for all of the ecosystems in the world to accelerate their growth, and particularly relevant post-pandemic in the economic situation that's slightly more difficult to help use our startup ecosystems, the innovation, the knowledge that we have in those, to rekindle economic and societal progress. Really, that's I think, speaking for all of us a bit, if I may, the mission that we all pursue. And again, startup success, entrepreneurial success should be independent of any region where our startup entrepreneurs are deciding to set up their business, gender, ethnicity, social background. The chances really should be as broad as possible and particularly geographically spread as possible. In Genome, we operate a global network of ecosystems. You can see the map here. It's still growing and it's continuously growing with one purpose. And this key purpose is to share knowledge, good policies, but also policy experiments, initiatives that haven't worked, and really share this knowledge so that others who are following in the footsteps of somebody who has piloted an idea, a concept, can learn, can draw conclusions, and do it even better in their own ecosystem. So knowledge transfer, building a network, a global fabric, global connectedness, the title of our webinar today. That's the mission with the network, and I'm so delighted to have you all here on the call today. Anna? I think we can carry on, and I would like at this point to ask Patrick to join us. Patrick, you're based in Amsterdam. You've done wonderful things with the Next Web. I had the pleasure of seeing it a couple of times. Please give us a little bit of a feeling of how you've built a community in Amsterdam and elsewhere in the world, and what it actually has done.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Stefan, for having me on this in this webinar. My name is Patrick Deleve. I'm indeed based out of Amsterdam. My background is actually showing Rotterdam. I'm also part of the IAB of Rotterdam, the International Advisory Board. I advise them on their MICE strategy. So that's why you see my background is the Rotterdam skyline. And yeah, I'm founder of TNW, the Next Web, which is a global digital brand that informs, inspires, and connects people who love tech. We do that through media, events, and services. We have a fairly large media outlet. We host a couple of large events. Our main event is coming up on the 30th of September. So in a couple of weeks, that's our flagship event. We have office space in Amsterdam. It's now, I know, 15,000 square meters, but this is an old, it's not updated yet, I see. And we help innovate larger companies and also governments to connect them to startup ecosystems. Yeah, this is an overview of our last event that was in person, which was in 2019. Some shots here. It's a very well produced event. It was attended by 15,000 people, but it started, of course, way smaller 15 years ago with only 280 people in a local church in Amsterdam. And grew out to yeah, what it is today. Yeah, the pandemic, of course, changed a lot for us, but we're happy that we'll be back this year also with an in-person event, although it's a bit smaller than our last one due to restrictions. We'll get to more on the ecosystem later on, but I'll give it back to you now, Stefan.
Patrick, later on, let's revisit what you already told me at an earlier conversation. What you are showing here, these pictures have been probably the catalytic event in Amsterdam. When we track the rise of Amsterdam in our rankings, we'll come to the details a little bit later in this webinar. It is most impressive having such a catalytic platform in the event. Really has, from what we can see in data, really transformed the trajectory. But I want to briefly switch over to Jonathan, if I may. Jonathan, if you would introduce us very briefly to the audience. I guess everybody already is very familiar with Gen, but would love to hear a brief introduction and your thinking.
Well, it's great to be here. We are thrilled about our partnership with startup Genome, and a big fan of the Next Web, and happy to have this conversation. And thank you, Stefan. It's actually very rare that you get one of the ultimate softball question, which is tell us about yourself or tell us about your organization. It's a real luxury. Thanks for that. It's an easiest question in the book. I don't think I have any control of these slides as background, but just to give you a little bit of information, Gen operates actually in close to 200 countries now, running programs. We have 14 areas of programs that we work in, and we have national affiliate chapters in nearly 100 countries. So between those and where we're running our programs, we're very proud of our footprint around the world. And the reason why we're proud of that is that what our broader mission is, similar to what Stefan said, I think at the beginning, is we're all here, Gen is a nonprofit organization, to be able to make it easier for anyone, anywhere, to be able to start or scale a firm. And our work really began over 10 years ago when we launched with the Kauffman Foundation Global Entrepreneurship Week as a way of how do we get more bottom-up communities getting excited about the culture that has really driven the pioneering spirit of the United States. This notion of people forming teams and testing ideas and figuring out better ways of doing things. And so we really worked hard on figuring out how do we make it easier for others to enjoy the same experience that Europe and the United States has been experiencing over the last 20 years. So I think if you just look at a couple of other things quickly about Gen, if you want to keep going, Stefan, you'll see that we have a lot of partnerships. If you just want to flick through the next couple of slides, we work a lot on building knowledge. We're very much about improving the quality of guidance given to the world about how to make entrepreneurship tick. We are obviously a cut out of the cloth of the Kauffman Foundation, which has very much been about validated data, being about how do we ensure that, as someone once rather rudely said, entrepreneurship is not managed by sociologists, but economists and data scientists. I think my camera froze there, but I'll keep going and fix that in a second. But we also have a number of partners on the corporate side that we work with, and I'll give you a quick sense of how we're structured. If you look at the next slide there, Stefan, we have a lot of wonderful people that get behind supporting our community. Richard Branson has been a fan from the beginning and is very supportive of the kind of work. We have a lot of other entrepreneurs. We have some rock stars and others that help us do something we think is really important, which is to try to reach communities that otherwise might not be participating in the great opportunity of obviously building something from scratch and figuring out a new way of doing things. Our work, if you keep going, Stefan, is just structured around celebrating the existing work being done by the community. And the biggest way we do that is through Global Entrepreneurship Week. Connecting, and we'll come to that in a minute in this panel discussion. Understanding, as I talked about, very much through deepened partnerships with people like Startup Genome and the World Bank and a lot of other research institutions. And then perhaps the largest number of programs we do is in the support field, whether we're doing startup community programs or other kinds of activities that support. And this gives you a little nice, colorful picture of what all of those kinds of events and activities are. We have, for example, we're even building physical campuses in some parts of the world where that's deemed important. We have a campus operating in South Africa that we opened with Richard Branson, and then we also have a large campus, by the way, 10,000 square meters. And then we're building a new campus in Cairo in Egypt. But perhaps the biggest work we're doing is not in the physical space. It's in really contributing to the importance of guiding policymakers, guiding entrepreneurs, guiding investors to be really smart participants in the ecosystem, capitalizing on what Brad felt is a very generous culture around the fact we all need to work together. And the first question should be, how can I help you? Not what can you do for me? And to really bring together what is a wonderful round table of actors that make up these ecosystems that we like to study. So I'll leave it at that, Stefan, and give the floor back to you and have our discussion.
Thank you, Jonathan. And from all experience, I can only say the wonderful work of Jen that I came in contact with first certainly was Gen Week, Entrepreneurship Week, which really is this community builder locally, but then later on also seeing and experiencing firsthand the work you do around policy, bringing together so many policymakers, always the same questions or similar challenges, and being able to come together for a couple of days or a number of days, exchange these ideas, discuss them, get advice. That's exactly what we hope, what we expect when we talk about this concept of global connectedness. And if you move us on a little bit, and let's dive right into our discussion here, importance of local connectedness. Why is this important? Why now? I made a point at the beginning of this webinar, startups are a growth driver for economies, never more important than in the situation we are currently in. It's a great opportunity that we should pursue. Global connectedness is a concept. It's a word we probably invented, at least use a lot. What do we really mean? Global connectedness for us is the interaction of entrepreneurs with others outside of the ecosystem, particularly with other entrepreneurs in ecosystems that are slightly more advanced, where they can go, they can see new business models emerging, they can see the application of new technologies and draw conclusions, inspiration for their own businesses. Similarly, connections to investors abroad that can help them bring in the smart money. And last but not least, connections to potential clients abroad. And then that's the second concept here, global market reach. That's actually the ability of a startup to address a market outside of their home ecosystem, be able to export and really start a scaling journey. And the scaling journey, and here it all comes back, then obviously is the most impactful when we talk economic impact, job creation, etc. is hugely important. It all starts with global connectedness. If we don't have these connections, there's not a chance to build global market reach, to sell effectively a competitive product that resonates with the culture, with a different market abroad. So really important. Some of our data, Startup Genome, you would expect us to show a little bit more data. Allow me to. If you consider on this slide, what we are showing is if you consider an ecosystem, and all factors are kept equal, the same investors, the same talent, the same technologies, the same educational background, the same regulation and regulatory frameworks. If you don't have global connectedness, you're on the blue line. If you are globally connected to leading to relevant ecosystems, the revenue for on average of a startup entrepreneur will grow twice as fast as it would if this connectivity is not there, if you're not part of the, as we call it, the global fabric of the startup ecosystem movement. Twice as fast, same conditions, same money, same grants, same investments. I think that's real data, global data, and I think that's a very compelling story. So the concept, I think we can assume, is hugely relevant to the question. Then that's what we want to dive in right now, starting with Patrick. How can we actually help our entrepreneurs, our startup ecosystems to build up this local connectivity? I think, Hannah, we can move over this slide. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, maybe a last one here to show. If you go one back just very briefly. That's a real life depiction of global connectedness, of the relationships between entrepreneurs in the world. And the closer you are in this network graph to the middle of the spider, the closer you are to the highest concentration of network connections. Unsurprisingly, it's the large ecosystem, Silicon Valley, New York, London. The others are like a halo grouped around it. That gives you an indication. But obviously our mission topic of this discussion today is how do we make sure that many others are moving to a similar concentration of network connections, really build up these global connections. Events, congresses, other platforms, other mechanisms are the topic that we want to dive into.
Hello, everyone. This is Jaewon Jung. I am a manager at Seoul Metropolitan Government. It is a great pleasure that I got a chance to give a presentation at this meaningful webinar, and I do appreciate Startup Genome for having me and my colleague today. I will briefly talk about a few key points of Seoul startup ecosystem, and my colleague from SBA will give a presentation about Trying Everything 2021, the global tech event at Seoul, which will be held in 2 weeks, which is very soon. For those who are not familiar with Seoul Metropolitan Government, SMG for short, let me briefly introduce the organization I belong to. SMG is one of the local governments of South Korea, and I am particularly working for Startup Policy Division. And we have Seoul Business Agency, SBA for short, which is a government-affiliated agency of SMG that helps implementing the policies. I truly believe that public and private sector in Seoul has cooperated and worked hard to vibrate Seoul's ecosystem. As a result, there are about 53K tech-based startups and 9 unicorns in Seoul. Last year, there were $3.76 billion investments, and 81 startups in Seoul had attracted more than $10 million funding. So in this slide, you can see clusters by subsector in Seoul. For instance, biotech startups and facilities are in Hongneung area. Big tech and AI startups are in Yangjae. There are 45 startups supporting facilities in Seoul, and about 12K startups are incubated at the center last year. And we also have Center for Foreign Startups in an effort to make Seoul as a global hub. SMG truly concerns a lot on global connectedness, so we make policies to help startups' global market reach. I brought 2 most recent projects to share with you. So we had opened the Seoul Startup Hub Ho Chi Minh, which serves as a local hub to assist startups in Seoul to make overseas entry, with active support from foreign government agencies. So this is the first case in which SMG's startup policy is exported overseas. And also it's the first ever global hub for startups. Also the Korea International Trade Association and Seoul Startup Hub will utilize Barcelona, Spain as the stage for Korean startups' global scale-up and to promote overseas testbed projects. We expect that the testbed business will provide an opportunity for Korean startups to test their innovative technologies and solutions abroad. We also believe that global tech events really matter for startup success because it provides a platform where startups can share their insights and dreams with other companies, investors, and partners. Therefore, we do believe that organizing a global tech event in Seoul is one of the roles that is required to us as a public sector. So before the COVID-19 era, we went to business trip a lot to participate global tech events all over the world for the reference. In TNW 2019, director of my division was invited as a speaker in the session named Fostering Attractiveness, the Case of Asian Megacities. We've also been to Slush 2019, and Deputy Mayor for Economy visited the Secretariat of Slush and got a chance to learn their know-how and share experiences. The former mayor of Seoul was invited as a keynote speaker in CES last year in the session titled The Reality of Smart City Development. So in these big tech events, we were able to be connected with the people all over the world. And in some business trip, some talented startups in Seoul were accompanied with us to the trip. And we have made an appointment with global big company or VCs for them. So from now on, Jiyoung will give you in detail explanation about our event, Try Everything 2021. So Jiyoung, could you please lead?
Yeah. Hello. This is SBA's Jiyoung Kim, the person in charge of Try Everything 2021. SBA is a business support institution for SME in Seoul, run by Seoul Metropolitan Government. It was established to promote and develop industries and to provide comprehensive and systemic support to SME located in Seoul. Try Everything 2021 is a global grand festival for startup companies that has been organized by Seoul in order to revitalize the startup environment, wherein the festival symbolized the startup mindset of have no fear of failure and try everything. The slogan of this year's festival is Jump Up, Scale Up, and while the potential of startup was unblocked last year through the slogan of Make It Possible. This year's slogan represents the goal of scaling up to the next level and promoting growth of startups through sharing a variety of information and know-how. Try Everything 2021 is held from September 15th through 17th at Seoul Shilla Hotel, and at the same time will be broadcast live on YouTube. In particular, this year's keynote speech will be presented by Jason Sanker, who was selected by Bloomberg as the world's #1 futurist and the writer of Amazon's #1 bestseller, World After COVID-19. And Stefan Trojansky, who is an expert in future technologies like VR and video, and the CEO of Scanline VFX, which produced a variety of videos with visual effects, for example, in the movie Avengers, wherein the keynote speech will provide insight regarding the revolution and future of startups. Let us preview the set.
Global Startup Festival. Lectures, seminars, global market entry, meetup, pitching, competition, online exhibition, activation of startup ecosystem. Try Everything 2021.
Here are the 4 spectator aspects of Try Everything 2021 to consider in order to further enjoy this sensational stage. First, in order to provide the opportunities for sharing insight and trends with the global big shots, the scale of strategies of a variety of countries, including the United States, Germany, Poland, Spain, etc., will be investigated, and startup investment and overseas expansion will be supported through the meetup pitch with the global VC. Second, the opportunities for building mutual cooperation with around 400 startups and specialized organizations are provided through networking, including open innovation challenges with the Global Corporation, VC and AC, etc. Third, in order to revitalize the startup culture and startup environment, 91 projects, including IR and networking, are being held through Seoul for 2 months from August 1st through September 30th. First, the opportunities for making investment are provided through online meetups between the startups and investors. 97 VC and AC companies are around 100 IP specialized organizations participate in order to promote the growth of startups by providing opportunities to make investment and business cooperation through the building of mutual matches between startups and investors. Further details related to Try Everything 2021 can be found on our website and official YouTube channel. Participation from anywhere in the world is possible, as Try Everything 2021 is broadcast live on YouTube, so please feel free to participate in anything you are interested in. Thank you.
I would love to hand it just briefly back to Patrick. Patrick, you had this wonderful story, catalytic event in Amsterdam, and really what started, what did you say, about 15 years ago or so? Maybe you can give us a little bit more insight.
There we go. Yeah, sure. The classic example of muting myself and then starting to speak. Yeah, sure. So yeah, we started 15 years ago and back then, you know, the word startup was, you know, hardly ever used, but also the city of Amsterdam was definitely not a city known for technology and known for thriving startups. So when we started with a very small event, 280 people, and our goal was to bring people together without knowing what the value was that we were bringing actually to the city. So one of the things why you should consider having a large-scale event in a city is, you know, and this is based on what we've learned from 15 years TNW in Amsterdam, but also there are also other examples of, for instance, Web Summit in Lisbon, but maybe even Slush in Helsinki, where this is very clear that these large events really have an impact on the local ecosystem. So one of the things is, you know, you're able to showcase your own ecosystem, meaning that the best companies from your city/country can be shown on stage. You can introduce them to international investors, but also other founders and other other knowledge workers in the space. Then slowly we started to noticing that the meetings that were set up during our event were actually also turning into deals, and deals from investor to investors. So Dutch VCs doing business with the UK, with US VCs, and more so, but also to Dutch entrepreneurs. So the funding rounds became bigger and more often, and that you could even track that down to the meeting that took place at your event. So we've been investing since, I think, 2008 in kind of like networking software in order to be able to set up meetings with each other, and also so that we can follow kind of like what happened after that. With all that funding, you're also attracting talent. These startups need to hire, they need to grow. But it's not only the talent locally that is or in your country that is attracted to your city, but it also makes sure that nobody, first of all, leaves, and second, you'll also need talent that is more experienced. So, and that is brought in from abroad. And Amsterdam has this great thing going on for them. It's a great place to live. So quality of life really helped to attract talent from abroad. And the increase in brain capacity for the city was just exponential over the years. There's also, of course, more universities that are focusing on how can we support entrepreneurs and how can we help students to become entrepreneurs. So also more focus on being more connected with locally as well international from the ground up, in this case from the schools. And then in the end, you know, that there's the Amsterdam government did a great, Amsterdam, but the Dutch government did a great job at investing early on in startup ecosystems and growing it and making sure that the policies that were put in place were attractive to international talent, to international companies to open up their offices in Amsterdam. And we have many examples of companies that opened their office in Amsterdam. Because of the first touch was actually our own conference. I always say, for instance, Uber is a great example. I visited Uber in Silicon Valley when it was, I think, still called Uber Taxi. They had like 25 people there. I invited them to come over to Amsterdam to speak at our event. I think 4 years later or 5 years later, they opened up an office in Europe. And where did they do that? Well, of course, they considered Amsterdam and they ended up opening in Amsterdam because they had been there and seen the ecosystem before. Now they have over 4,000 people working in Amsterdam, and those are not the cheapest jobs, let's put it that way. So the government also has this is called tax. Maybe we can go to the next slide as well. And so, you know, there are various benefits, of course, and I don't have to explain them all because it's very logic, most of it, but you have direct impact of events, and you can measure that. Most events do not measure that. It's also not easy to measure it, but you can make an attempt, and we're getting better at it. Yeah, you can measure, of course, kind of like the number of attendees, how much they spend on average, travel, et cetera, those types of things. But also, how fast is your startup ecosystem growing over time? Well, once you started to undertake certain policies in your ecosystem, and one of them could be large events. And then you can actually measure the number of jobs that you have been creating in the sector. And that is taxes, corporate taxes and personal income tax are great ways for governments to make money, and it helps. So jobs created is a very big impact, has a very big impact on your city, but also I think the event is what we're saying, kind of we're the catalyst of that. The first push of the ecosystem, and of course now we're just a small part in a way larger machine. But yeah, the first push was a very important push. Maybe next slide. So
Patrick, allow me just for one comment, if that's all right. I mean,
sure.
You told me this story in the morning. You went from 250 participants to 15,000 in 2019. That in itself is an incredible success, and it's a good measurement.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Then there are all the economic factors you were just alluding to that are super impressive. What we've seen, and I'm trying to make the case here a little bit for our ecosystem leaders that are participating, how do you argue for a budget with your local government or other sponsors in order to do things? What we've seen in Amsterdam is a rank through the Global Startup Ecosystem Report, our own ranking rise over years, where it's only one of 3 cities in the world that consistently outperforms and consistently rises in the ranks, not just in size, but through the ranking. That's incredibly rare. So it must really have been a catalytic initiative that you've pursued over many years. But sorry, Patrick, just back to you. These numbers here are very impressive.
No, so sure. So I think the thing was we came from Amsterdam. So I was born in Rotterdam, and I worked in Amsterdam. I lived in Amsterdam. So it's a city where we lived and what we loved, and we were setting up companies in Amsterdam. So the fact that we are in Amsterdam is just also a bit of luck, of course. So the government, the local government, has never really supported us in kind of like, oh, you're getting X million, like for instance what Lisbon did with Web Summit. That unfortunately, I must say, didn't happen to us in Amsterdam. I think if they would have done that, actually, we could have been at least 5 to 10 times bigger. But we had to do it on our own. Of course, the city is helping in any way they can, but not necessarily financially. And certain cities are doing that. And I think, for instance, Lisbon, they took a kind of like they took a risk, fairly large risk, 10 million a year or so risk. But in the end, it does pay off for them. The structure of a deal like that is, of course, not kind of like here's 10 million a year, come to us. So there's much more that comes to that. And for instance, we're also looking and talking to various cities in Europe to host not a TNW conference, which is a general, more general tech event, but more specialist events. And yeah, those are interesting conversations, and it comes down to, I think, some financial support, but also network support, and you need, in the end, you also need the local support. So and those are conversations that you're having then with various cities, and maybe Jonathan has a moving event, so he can tell you all about that.
Maybe before we even jump there, Patrick, Jonathan, allow me a question from Gabrielle in the audience. Biggest obstacle in getting something like TNW, such a catalytic event, congress, whatever it is, initiative off the ground, what did you experience?
Biggest obstacle.
Is it getting the funding, or is it getting community buy-in? Is it really telling the world to come and attract?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger obstacles is that everybody is copying everybody. So, we have been copied maybe 50 times, like up to the copy of our emails and the copy of our marketing. So on the website, an event almost always looks the same. It's always the biggest, the best, the greatest, and I think that is really hard. How do you distinguish yourself from events that claim, we have 15,000 people coming over, but when you're there, you see kind of like, well, it's actually divided by 10 or divided by 100, but you don't know that up front. So that is, the fight against kind of like maybe copycats is almost the hardest part, I would say.
Is it probably also telling a very clear USP, a really clear story? Why is this ecosystem interesting? What does it stand for? We heard in the morning from Seoul, deep tech, highly engineered technological solutions that are hugely impressive. Are these the examples? Do I need something like that to create this global audience and the connectivity?
Yeah, of course, there needs to be USP, but the biggest USP, I think, is, we're organizing B2B, we call it B2B festival. So there's a business and fun, but the main thing why people are coming back is because they can do business. So that is actually the biggest USP. It's not like everybody wants to go to an event to spend 2 days. Of course, you have a few people that want to travel the world and spend 2 days somewhere. But it needs to be viable for their business, and if you can provide that and connect them to people that are of interest to them, then they keep coming back. And that is the main thing that you have to show to people. And what you have to look for is kind of like what's the retention on people coming back. That's Amsterdam has a lot going for it. People more and more need to be there anyway, once or twice a year, because they have investments there, or they have an office there, and I'm talking about international people. So that narrative, and then combining that narrative with your event, kind of like, well, you need to be there anyway for this board meeting you have. So why don't you plan that board meeting in the week that we have TW? And that is, that's, you need to be part of that ecosystem in order to even know that, right? So it's, we've seen a lot of event organizers that are really good at organizing events, but they're really bad at organizing tech events. But because you need to come from the scene itself in order to be successful.
Clear narrative, clear value proposition. You said it, Patrick. They come to do business in the end, to be part, but also to be part of our tech community. Jonathan, you are actually in the process of running one of the largest events, competitions, but I'll leave it to you to tell us and inspire us a little bit with what you're doing around Global Entrepreneurship Week.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'll begin by saying it's interesting because I'm often skeptical about events, and I'm sure Patrick is too, in that I think one of the things that occurs in our field, where we're all in the world of entrepreneurial ecosystems, enabling these innovators and trying to make all of this happen, is that we are very much also of a culture where it's about communities that are listening to each other, are including each other, are trying to be a little bit more level the playing field. And as a result, and of course, much of the work that's been done, whether it's the next web community, global community that grew out of Amsterdam, a lot of it's bottom-up work. It's not top-down work, as we all know in the entrepreneurship space generally. And so sometimes I've often actually said to my teams, guys, we need to be focusing on what are the outputs and what do we achieve as a global entrepreneurial ecosystem that we're supporting, not on the means to get there. And I think events are means to get there, but as Patrick said, there are always going to be some people that just want to go to the event because they want to travel. And we sometimes sort of rather rudely refer to some people as being conference entrepreneurs. It's really about going and networking and socializing and so forth. But that's all part of how things get done. Having said that, yes, thank you, Stefan. Yeah, we obviously built everything we do at Gen, the bottom up, from the communities that celebrate Global Entrepreneurship Week. And this concept was one that we did with Gordon Brown, then Prime Minister of the UK, and the Kaufman Foundation. We came up with this notion that there were a lot of communities around the world, in Gordon Brown's case, in the United Kingdom, that didn't really understand what entrepreneurship meant and what it was about. But it was about people conducting experiments, figuring out better ways of doing things. It wasn't just about either some people viewed it as being the way business schools view it, which is big corporate management, the management of large corporations. And a lot of people viewed it as being the world of profit and spreadsheets and marketing and accounting. And, so we wanted to very much spread the culture that was evident. And so we built this thing called Global Entrepreneurship Week, and it's pretty fantastic. We have more than 40,000 events in 1 week every November. Naturally, for last year in the height of the pandemic, much of that went virtual, but we've never done virtual events, frankly, before the pandemic. So that in itself was an added innovation. I think GW will always be hybrid in the future. But essentially what it is we have in every country of the world, a organization that plans a national campaign called Global Entrepreneurship Week in the name of their country. And the goal is to gather the ecosystem communities that are already converted to the value of entrepreneurship, whether you're arguing for it because it's a great way to educate your young people because you teach them self-resilience, or whether you're arguing for it because you're a government person that says this is how we generate jobs and build economic growth, or whether you're arguing for it because this is how we unleash innovation, whatever your argument is, there's always a large number of people around the world that don't need to be converted to the importance of entrepreneurship. And as I often say, too often it's treated by countries as being a side ring of their economic circus, and it really needs to be the heart of it. So as a result, we get those communities together during Global Entrepreneurship Week, and we get them in every country to reach out and figure out ways to increase the pipeline. So for people who are very much in the field, the people that might show up at the next web, this is about how do we get more people, kicking the tires, experimenting, seeing whether at some point in their professional life this may be part of their experience. And so we're in a way selling the case for entrepreneurship in large part with Global Entrepreneurship Week, and that's what it's really always been about: celebrating the existing entrepreneurs and ecosystems and inspiring more people to join them, to support them and be a part of them. And so that really is a classic catalyzing grassroots campaign. We obviously don't organize 40,000 events. We manage national, we call them hosts, GW hosts in each country, and they put together leadership teams and partnerships and stuff and build the natural momentum, kind of like social media works in the same way. So Global Entrepreneurship Week at the end of the day is about figuring out how do we get more citizens. The world needs more entrepreneurs in the equation. The other two main things we do, and I got a couple of slides on them if people want to read about them, but we'd love it, by the way, if you're interested in getting involved in Global Entrepreneurship Week, there's something happening in most communities in the world. So you can go to gew.co and look up your country or your community. But the other one, of course, which—
Oh, Jonathan, if I may, just as a very brief comment, we see outside of the leading ecosystems, of course, we see so many geographies where entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurship, still is not really being cherished, particularly in economically more challenging circumstances. And when a young boy, a young girl has to decide, do I want to pursue a government job that's relatively secure? Do I want to work for a state-owned corporation, relatively secure? So to build this culture around entrepreneurship, take a risk, and probably also be rewarded by social status around you in your community, the higher appreciation of entrepreneurship, and to give more people the chance to actually, as you put it, kick the tires, try it out. I think that's where I see a lot of impact in Global Entrepreneurship Week, and that's maybe something that can only push jointly for those ecosystems where culture, where my parents possibly would say as a young student, well, don't do that, don't try your luck for the next 2 years. Actually do it, because it's going to help you, and it's going to increase your knowledge, it's going to increase your career prospects.
Well, absolutely. And it's, we say, hey, look, it's zero risk, go kick the tires. But the same is true about, startup community events like startup weekends and things like that. There's an awful lot of free events in the community where you can go and say, are these the kind of people that I could fit in with? Could I contribute here? Could I succeed here? So Global Entrepreneurship Week is designed to do that, give people a chance to come and kick the tires without having to take any risk at the outset of actually starting a company, but they can see what other people are doing who are participating in competitions or other kinds of creative activities and events that occur during that week. So you're absolutely right. I mean, we've got to have a steady drumbeat of constantly giving people an alternative to taking that path that says, yep, you got to get a job and you want to work for someone secure that's going to keep paying you over a period of time, a culture which is really complete antithesis to what disruptive entrepreneurs do. They sort of thrive on uncertainty and lack of predictability, and there's a lot of people that are, particularly when you're younger in life, there's a lot of people that have got an appetite for that. So we want to give them some paths to go down. So I think the other thing, just to mention, obviously, that there's two other major things we do, which you could define in the global event community world. One is the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which is obviously our largest event. We actually have a delegation from every country that comes. Often that's led by the minister of that country, but it's not a government. We do have a ministerial Congress. We have an event for policymakers. We have several of our communities within GEN, all of our work streams have their annual meetings during the Congress. So for example, we have something called the Global Business Angels Network, which is a network of the angel investor organizations around the world, the leading ones in each country. And, they come together, share best practices, support each other. The strong ones like, ACA and EBAN in Europe, are spending time nurturing and mentoring the more nascent, newer ones around the world. But most importantly, they get together and work out what are the unique agendas we have at the global level, such as cross-border syndication, cross-border investing, two areas that, for example, are the features of our next Congress, which will be in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And that is vitally important because it's a good illustrative point as to why these events are so important. We used to see reported in the early stage investor community, certainly on the angel side, closer to the angel side than obviously the venture side, we were seeing, 80% of investor engagement in startups occurring locally, and 20% you might get a few people from outside. The pandemic completely turned that upside down. So most of our major angel investor networks are reporting a massive shift in culture and level of comfort with people doing a lot more due diligence internationally. And so we're seeing 80% of the, if they're doing pitch competitions and things, we're seeing 80% of the investors come from outside of the country and 20% from inside the country. And so actually one of the things we do, we call it internally the last mile of trust, which is, the importance of a live event like the Next Web or the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, which is investors are telling us, I can pretty much do 80% of my due diligence without showing up in the city or without actually spending time with them or people around them that know who they are. So one of the things we do at our Global Entrepreneurship Congress, we say, come do that last mile. We get to spend time with them, come in and do that relationship building with either directly with a company you want to invest in, or indeed with the intermediaries to that country that we can show are proven and trustworthy in giving you independent counsel and advice. That's just one community and one thing that happens within GW, but rather like the Global Startup Ecosystem Report, you break down the connectivity beautifully in terms of lots of different data sources. And I think the same is true of the Congress. We try to turn around and say, where's that connectivity on the investor side, just to give an example. But we also do the connectivity on every other level. So for example, our ministerial is effectively an informal peer-to-peer network of ministers that are each trying to design and roll out domestic policies, whether they be programs or regulatory changes, to support their entrepreneurs, because they've all got a similar mission. They're like, we've got to figure out how to make it easier for anyone in our country to start and scale a company. Absolutely, we want to be part of the solution. Where are we creating barriers inadvertently? What barriers can be removed? What incentives can be put in place? And obviously government sets the rules and incentives. So obviously we turn around and say, when you're trying to break those down, talk to somebody else that's done the same thing. I mean, we have a cluster of countries that all get together and talk about why did startup visa work in some places and didn't in others, in terms of trying to get more fluidity and flow of talent across borders. What are the best kind of soft landing packages that are being effective at encouraging this much faster flow of data we want to see across borders? As I often say in the context of the pandemic, this pandemic was tailor-made for global response because everybody in the world was impacted at the same time by the same challenge. It's almost as if people from Mars attacked our world, and yet somehow we had about the least global response to anything I've ever seen. I mean, we're better at coming together as allies and, fighting against a war than we are about fighting against an extraterrestrial, a global challenge like we did with the pandemic. And so we've often turned around to governments. In fact, we're in the process of doing it now and building our whole Gen policy agenda, the different areas we're working with governments on. We do the Gen policy audit with Startup Genome. We're doing a whole range of work with our actors and partners in saying, you guys have to completely rethink how you're doing it and do it together. Talk to your opposite numbers in ministries across the world. And of course, the work that we're all doing, whether it's the Next Web or Startup Genome or Gen, obviously is trying to make that path easy, an environment they can do it outside of geopolitical sort of complications. We're pretty agnostic when it comes to working with countries because we work with their ecosystems and the ecosystem leaders. We try not to get involved in the daily geopolitical headline issues between nations that often end up, burning out So you'll see us working, like our next Congress is in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, you know. We do a lot of work in Russia. We do a lot of work in countries where maybe at the geopolitical level, there's sometimes more tension among nations. But as far as we look at it, we're focused on the entrepreneurs and the investors.
And that's what we said, Jonathan, in the beginning when I said let's network, let's learn from each other. I mean, you've so beautifully illustrated it on the one hand side for the entrepreneurs and the other hand side for the policymakers that enable our startup ecosystems. Allow me to shift a little bit the discussion. Got a really interesting question here from Dale out of the US. It's to understanding how can we create more excitement, more buy-in locally with our local stakeholders in this globalization or globally connected, global connectedness agenda. I think I made a data point. Genome, of course, we have data to say it's 2x. That's the headline number. It's very convincing. But you, Jonathan, Patrick, you might have a few additional thoughts around the topic. So how do we say engage in this Congress? Go to the next web. Go to GEC. Host something yourself where you attract people from other places to infuse different thinking, different learning into your ecosystem. How do we make this first step to create some excitement?
Well, I'll kick it off, and then Patrick, I'm sure you've got some better insight. But I think the first thing is that simple. I mean, I have to say, I've used that a lot and said, look, it's plain and simple. If you're in an ecosystem which has got a strong, thick line of connectivity and different levels of sophistication with other ecosystems, you know what? There's so much great serendipity that goes on, and 1 + 1 = 7. You don't really know what's going to happen as a result of the cross-fertilization of all of the actors within the ecosystems. So if your local community is not doing that, you can do that. And the cool thing is it's so easy to do. You know, I mean, you can show up at a live event and kick off relationships that you don't have to be constantly spending time getting on an airplane to go to nurture. You can do your global community building. Not to mention the fact that, you know what, if you're in a community and trying to, some of those companies are going to need to be engaging globally, either because they're figuring out how to grow, or they're looking for new markets, or, you know, a lot of the people in our work just turn around and say the reason we're connecting globally is that we just love the idea of having a starting point of someone that could be trusted, network of trust in a part of the world that all of a sudden is so to engage. And I think if nothing that this is the reason that you should be doing it. So Patrick, I don't know whether you probably got
Patrick. I know you have the Amsterdam story you told us today, but you're also working with many places in the world to help them better connect, use conferences, other means of building community. How do you help local ecosystem stakeholders convince their budget holders, their other stakeholders to engage more, to do more around global connectedness?
Yeah, that's of course a good question. I think Jonathan actually answered most part of it. But what I would add is try to find examples and highlight those examples. So often, you know, people, you know, if there's money to be made, then people will look. That's kind of like what I think is happening in most parts of the world. So if there's a good example in your ecosystem that is globally super connected and is now the unicorn of Minnesota in this case, highlight that example and use it as a reason, kind of like, if we want more of this, we need to do more what they do, and what they do is, you know, they're connected to the rest of the world, so we need to do that more. I think that could help, and of course find research, and you're here at the right place with Startup Genome, and I think the 2x number is quite convincing for policymakers to make a step, and in the end they want to I think try if you can open up their eyes, and they want to be re-elected. So yeah.
Good argument, Patrick. Allow me to even put another question to you, and maybe Jonathan as well. I'm sitting here in London, and it's global connectedness by design. So many people travel through. We have this business similar to Amsterdam and many of the leading places in the world. if you're sitting in a smaller ecosystem, maybe in a very highly specialized one, the place for agricultural technology, AgTech, just take an example.
Yep.
Do we need to do more? We got a small community, we got a small local market. Do we need to do more? How do we do it best to bring this community regionally, globally together, create more learning, create more business opportunities?
I think it's actually easier if you're very specialized and focused. So, if you have a small ecosystem or a small city, find who are we? Why do people come to our city, and what are we known for? What are we good at? And focus on that and double down. I mean, nowadays, everything, even agri-tech is actually a very, very large sector. And if you can claim agri-tech, then you did a great job. So I think the Netherlands and Amsterdam have more than that. But yeah, what our successes are nowadays mainly in fintech, I would say. So we have or at least the latest 5 examples are all fintech companies that are doing great. So yeah, I think try to find that focus and double down on that. That's what I would say.
Brings us back to the value proposition, the story to tell, the value to deliver in a congress and an event, and the things you do thereafter. I also wanted to briefly pick up on something that Jonathan said. Jonathan, you said that the pandemic has fundamentally changed the way we interact, at least what you see in GBAN. 80% of discussions can be done online. The last 20% are building trust, maybe in a more physical setting. Have we fundamentally changed the way we need to look at our events, our congresses as a mechanism? Patrick, I think you made a remark before as well. We're probably in a world where we start online to build a relationship, and then we give it a stamp of approval or whatever it takes.
This ties in with what Jonathan said earlier, the last mile of trust. So events used to be the first mile of trust and the last mile of trust, but nowadays, you connect online first, and then you use events as the last mile, where you shake hands or you fist bump and do that deal. That also has a big impact on how to organize certain events or how to set them up, because the role of events has changed.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that, the good news is that I think the virtual technology is going to go on improving, but what's dramatic about it is the breadth of society that's comfortable using it. So I always like to give the example of my mother, who within two weeks in the UK of the pandemic was perfectly comfortable opening up her MacBook and talking to her doctor, whereas no way she would have been comfortable doing that if she hadn't been forced into it. So I think we'll always have a somewhat hybrid component to everything that we're doing, even in the event world. But having said that, I kind of agree with Patrick in terms of, it was always that first mile and last mile. I think people still want the first mile. I think if you can get the first mile from the live event, then I think it's going to make that relationship speed faster, because as the Chinese and a lot of people in Asia have always taught us, don't rush into things. Let's sit at the table, let's break bread together, let's get to understand each other a little bit better, and then let's do business. And I think the value of events, of being able to break that ice, to be able to build some value, is still going to be there. But as Patrick says, if it's not there at the beginning, we're at least, I think we've got more people comfortable looking into a camera than it ever used to be. And that's halfway towards having had that initial first mile of interaction. But I would just quickly point out how we change in the future. I think that I think events, if anything, right after the pandemic, it's going to be like supply and demand generally in the global value chain. It's like, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but right now in the United States, you can't buy anything you want. And if you want it, it's twice the price, and everything is crazy. I changed my car recently, and I had people waiting in line to buy my used car. I was like, what happened here? But I certainly think that we're going to see the same with live events. I think there's pent-up demand for people getting back to doing some face-to-face relationship building. I know we have great sponsors for our next GEC, for example. And even if we have to change the date because pandemic international travel regulations get in the way, we will make sure that that event is live, because that is, 75% of its value is that relationship, that connectivity. We just hope that hybrid events and the pandemic just makes things, if anything, it's going to improve things. It's going to make it more okay if your headline speaker joins on the screen rather than in person, whereas that used to be a little awkward. People are like, oh, they couldn't get him to come. Now it's okay. Or it's going to make it possible for more people to engage who otherwise just can't travel for family or whatever reasons. So I think that we'll probably see the growth of the hybrid event, but I still think we're going to see 80% of the value proposition for the live attendees.
That's maybe the trigger word. I have to say, looking at our watch, Patrick, Jonathan, thank you so much for terrific insights. I think we all agree, building startup ecosystems, we need this connectedness. We need the connectedness to other leading ecosystems where we can learn, where we can exchange ideas, where we can get investment, where we can attract talent. Congresses, events as a form of collaboration, hugely important. I think we've seen a great variety. Patrick's example, what has happened 15 years ago at Catalytic for the city. Where does it stand today? It's amazing. Jonathan being active in so many countries the world over, changing entrepreneurial culture, bringing people into entrepreneurship. And then that's the grassroots level, but also at the top level, connecting the political leadership to exchange ideas, concepts, and learnings. Fascinating world. I think we are on a good track, hopefully, cross fingers, to come back to physical events. And I want to take the last minute to actually make one or two announcements about upcoming conferences where we will be active and we would love to meet. First of all, London Tech Week, we will be launching the Global Startup Ecosystem Report on the 22nd of September, physical and virtual. So please join us for the newest trends that we see in the world of global startup ecosystems. And Hannah, if you move us on a little bit to the next slide. Yeah, sorry. On October the 13th, we want to discuss, and we will be discussing the findings of the GSER with representatives from ecosystems all over the world, for the African region, Latin America, Asia, the MENA region, and North America, of course, in order to get regional perspectives, interpretations. Would love you to join us again, October 13th. You can see it here, and we will distribute the respective invitations very soon. Patrick, Jonathan, I'll leave the last words to you to say something about TNW and GEC.
Yeah, so stay tuned for information on GEC. The website is gec.co.co. We would love to have you there. The good news about the GEC, because of it being a moving event and the need to actually buy an airline ticket and a hotel room, we do not charge a fee to attend the GEC. But we hope to have you there if you're engaged in this work. We have entrepreneurs and investors, but we're very heavy on the B2B. We've got a lot of the people in as Brad Feld calls them, the feeders who are feeding the leaders are entrepreneurs. And so we'd hope to have you come and join us at the GEC. You would be most welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. We certainly will be there. And Patrick, when do we see you? When can we come to Amsterdam?
You can come to Amsterdam anytime, of course, and have a coffee with me. But on 30th of September and 1st of October, we're organizing TNW conference for a max of 4,500 people in person. And there will be a digital component, of course, as well. And we're mixing the digital with in person when it comes to matchmaking and networking. So yeah, you go to thenextweb.com/conference or just thenextweb.com, you'll find your way there. And hopefully we'll see some of you or all of you there. And otherwise in London, Riyadh, or whatever other city in the world we need to see each other.
Great. Patrick, Jonathan, thank you very much for joining our discussion here and presenting these wonderful examples, insightful examples. Thanks for the audience for joining us today. For questions, please come back to us. We are most happy to answer them on the back of this webinar, and we'll also be distributing the materials of today. Hope to see you very, very soon, as Patrick and Jonathan said, either in Amsterdam at London Tech Week, at GEC, or Try Everything 2021 in Seoul, which also is going to kick off already next week. Stay safe in the interim, and hope to speak and see you soon. Bye for now.